statements.
Listen to these videos. How you doing?
I think the problem is the last group they
Speak in unison.
That's more than a little.
All right. After a recount, Mr. Cousins will give the first opening statement. 2 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Murtagh, to the League of Women Voters for hosting this important debate. 2 years ago, I was elected to the Senate to represent Greenberg, Mount Pleasant, and about the taxes being too high, that education not being the first priority of the state, that health care was too expensive, and that working families were struggling to make ends meet. I'm running for re-election for the same reason. Our legislative process is still dysfunctional. The Republican Party bosses and their special interest friends still narrowly control the state Senate, and the fight for real reform continues. When voters sent me to Albany, it really marked the beginning of change, and it was a new era. And we told Republicans that we would no longer stand, frankly, for the regressive tax policies or the failure to provide relief for working families and seniors. My opponent continues to say that nothing has changed in Albany since day one. But after all that's happened in Albany over the past 2 years, he's probably the only one who believes that. Change really has begun, but obviously there's more to be done. We are obviously still too heavily taxed. We need to alleviate that burden, and I support a progressive taxation based on our ability to pay and decreasing our reliance on Wall Street as we address our budget shortfall. I taught public schools, sent my children to public schools. I'm proud of the hundreds of millions of dollars that I brought to 2 school districts and 2 municipalities. I protected health care by preventing the closure of the community hospital at Bob's Ferry, protected jobs, protected homeowners by co-sponsoring a project Operation Protect Your Home, which brought lenders and borrowers together to keep thousands of people who might otherwise have lost their homes to renegotiate loans. Legislation has been introduced by me to reform elections, and I've had a package of bills that, because the Republican-controlled Senate is still the way it is, I've not been able to pass, but they talk about establishing voter registration that's less intimidating, increased civil penalties for those who suppress votes, need to outlaw deceptive campaigns. I'm also a sponsor of clean election legislation that would level the playing field. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thank you. Mr. Murtagh.
Thank you, and thank you to the lead for having us here this evening. I'm tempted to ask for a show of hands to see if I'm really the only one who believes that nothing has changed in Albany in the last couple of years. I'm going to let that go. You know, the most honest man in the room, I'd like to say, is me, but in fact, I think the most honest man in the room is my friend Frank Kulik, who spoke to Congresswoman Lillian G. Russell a little while ago and asked when everybody's going to finally admit that there's just not enough money to go around anymore and things are going to have to change. The fact is, Frank, unfortunately, in Albany as in Washington, they don't buy that. They think there is enough money to go around. As long as they can keep getting it from you and me and everybody else in this room, there's plenty of money to go around. At least that's the mentality. A reporter asked me this afternoon what I thought the 3 key issues in the race were. And frankly, my answer was taxes, the budget, and the budget. It's no more complicated than that. I don't have to explain it to you. The senator doesn't have to explain it to you. You know it every time you get a tax bill. You know it every time you sit down to pay your bills. If you're a senior citizen, like a senior citizen who spoke to me a few weeks ago at the Home Field Association, you know it when you're trying to figure out how to pay for the oil to heat the house that you lived in all your life or close to it, where you raised your family, and you're still trying to hold on and pay the taxes. You know it if you're just like the lady at a diner a couple of weeks ago who said to me, you know, I want to stay in my house. My daughter wants me to move in with her because I just can't afford the taxes anymore, but I don't want to move in with my daughter. I love her, but I want to be independent. You don't need us to tell you what the situation is with the taxing and the spending, because you're living and breathing it every day. They're spending too much. They're relying on a source of revenue, Wall Street, I'll talk about this later, that is no longer there for them. They're not willing to control control the spending and the taxation. And frankly, they're also not willing to make the changes to the institution of the legislature that would allow real reform to take place.
Thank you. We now have a question from the England voters. Considering the projected $8 billion budget gap for '09, do you agree with Governor Patterson's mandate of across-the-board budget cuts? And then please explain why why not you agree or disagree. And that would be Mr. Murtagh going first.
Thank you. You know, I credit Governor Patterson, I almost said Governor Spitzer, Governor Patterson, for standing up a couple of months ago on a television speech, and it was somewhat unprecedented for the governor to go live on the air as he did, to tell us about the deficit we were facing. And that was before Lehman Brothers and all these other problems. And as you correctly pointed out, that deficit is now ballooned to projections of $8 billion. And I know the senator said the other night in another forum, and she may say it again tonight, we don't really know if it's that bad. But we can quibble over the dollars. It's a huge deficit. The answer is yes, we have to look at every single function of government and every department of government. Does that mean uniform across-the-board cuts? No, it probably doesn't, because there are certain things that government must and should do: education, policing, health, and safety. But you have to look at everything, and I thought the most telling thing about the governor's speech 3 or 4 months ago was that every member of the legislature, and I fault both sides of the aisle, stood up immediately, applauded the governor, and then said, but don't touch this project, don't touch that department, don't touch this special interest. You can't work that way, ladies and gentlemen. Everything has to be on the table, everything must be on the table, and then we can make hard choices, admittedly, but intelligent choices.
Thank you. Mr. Cousins.
Yes, absolutely. I do not think that there should be across-the-board cuts. Clearly, we must take a look at state government. We must prioritize. We must get rid of the unfunded mandates that we can. There is a whole retooling that must happen with our state government. I'm always concerned when anyone approaches it with a broad brush and say, you know, there has to be 5% or 10% cut, because obviously different departments do different things. There are departments that 5% would mean absolutely nothing, and there are departments where it would absolutely decimate the agency or what good work they do. Clearly, there were protections that had to be done: education, healthcare, aid to municipalities. If there were, if I had not stopped, say, and said hold harmless education or hold harmless aim to municipalities, then people like Councilman Murtagh would have to be scrambling, and taxpayers would have to pay the burden if the state suddenly pulled out of the commitment of funding. So clearly everything is on the table. However, there are things that have already been budgeted. People depend on those things happening, and we have a responsibility to hold them harmless if we can.
Thank you. We will now open up the mics for questions from the audience. Please come forward. You can line up behind either or microphone. Just a brief reminder, when you come to the mic, state your name and address. Make your question brief. It must address an issue. First question? Nobody's concerned about the state. Okay.
This is very